All right, welcome to Unit 8. Unit 8 is about trigonometry, and today we're just going to do the first part of Section 8.1, which is just going to be basically the introduction to what trigonometry is. I love the definition that we have here. It's just straightforward. It's the study of relationships among the angles and sides of a right triangle. The things that we talk about in this unit only will apply to right triangles. So if it's not a right triangle, then it will not these relationships will not exist. So right here I have my right triangle, and we know that across from the right angle is what we call the hypotenuse. And in trigonometry we still refer to it as the hypotenuse. For abbreviation purposes today I'm going to write HYP when I'm referring to the hypotenuse. Now, in trigonometry, we have to identify the angle that we're looking for. And if I'm looking for this angle right here, we're going to call that angle theta. Theta is a Greek letter, and that's the sign for theta, kind of like pi and alpha. That's called theta. Spell it like this, and it's that. So that's theta. Now, based on where this angle is, we then have different names for our legs besides just legs that make up this right angle. The leg that is across from it, so directly across from the angle, we call the opposite leg. And again, for abbreviation purposes today, I'm going to just write OPP. The leg that is attached to the angle we call the adjacent angle, or the adjacent leg, sorry, and we'll abbreviate it ADJ. Now that I've named my sides of my triangle, what their names are going to be based on where my angle is, I can now introduce you to the 6 trig ratios. There's a total of 6 of them. And you're going to finally get to use those buttons on your calculator that you've seen all the time and wondered what they were about. We'll be doing that in our next section as we talk about how to use these trig functions. So the first trig function, or trig ratio, is called the sine of theta. Now we abbreviate sine on our calculator when we write it like that. Now I know if you were in language arts we would say sin, but when we're in math we say sine when we see this word. So it's the sine of theta. And sine of theta is found by doing the opposite over the hypotenuse. So opposite over a hypotenuse. The next trig function is called the cosine. And cosine of theta is abbreviated as COS, and it is adjacent over hypotenuse. So it is this leg over the hypotenuse. And the third trig function, halfway done, in just a moment, is called tangent of theta. And again, to abbreviate it, we'll abbreviate it as TAN. And again, we're not going to say tan. When we see that, we'll say tangent. When we see this, we'll say cosine. And when we see this, we'll say sine. This is our abbreviation, so we don't have to write the whole word out. And tangent is opposite over adjacent. Okay, so those are my first 3 trig functions. Now the other 3 trig functions are actually reciprocals of these 3. So the reciprocal of sine is called cosecant. And cosecant of theta we'll abbreviate as CSC. And that means cosecant of theta. And cosecant of theta is just the reciprocal of this, so it's hypotenuse over opposite. The next trig function is secant. And secant will be abbreviated as SEC. And again, it's just the opposite or reciprocal of this, so it's hypotenuse over adjacent. And the last trig function is called cotangent. And to abbreviate it, we do COT. And again, we don't say cot, we say cotangent, secant, cosecant. And cotangent is just the reciprocal, so it will be adjacent over opposite. Okay, so those are my 6 trig functions, and you will eventually have them all memorized, and hopefully within the next couple of days you'll have them memorized. Now, someone came up with a long time ago, I can remember learning this a long time ago, it's been around for a long time, came up kind of with a little acronym of how to, or mnemonic device if you will, to remember all of the trig functions, meaning these 3, because once you know these 3, then you can find these 3. Now remember, sine is opposite over hypotenuse. So they use the 3 letters as SOH. So sine is opposite over hypotenuse. Then the next word they have represents cosine, which is cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. And then the third is tangent, which is opposite over adjacent. Now, if you have older siblings that have had math, and especially trigonometry, you might have heard them, as they're doing their math, say SOHCAHTOA. And SOHCAHTOA, that word kind of sounds Indianish in a way, represents the 3 trig functions. Sine opposite over hypotenuse, cosine adjacent over hypotenuse, and tangent opposite over adjacent. Now, I will attach to this video also some videos that you can go watch where one gentleman, it's a little quirky, but he sings about SOHCAHTOA and says it numerous times so it can get it ingrained in your brain. And then there's a really cute one about the song Shut Up and Dance With Me and how it really was about shut up and SOHCAHTOA. So I will attach those as well so you can go look at those when you have a moment. So what your first half of your assignment is going to be is just asking you to find the 6 trig functions. Now on my first example, you'll notice that I already have all my sides and I have my theta. So I know this one's my adjacent, and this one's my opposite, and this one's my hypotenuse. So then you'll just say, okay, what's sine of theta? And we'll use the abbreviations now. Well, sine is opposite over hypotenuse. So it's 8 over 17, and that's in lowest terms, so I'm done with that one. So now I'll go to cosine of theta. Cosine is ca, which means adjacent over hypotenuse. So adjacent is the numerator, 15 over the hypotenuse, which is 17. Next trig function is tangent. And tangent is opposite over adjacent, 8/15. Remember, once you've got those, then to get your other 3, you're just simply going to do the reciprocal. Now, the way I remember that sine, that its reciprocal is cosecant, is because it's got to be the opposite letter as well. So sine will be, start with a C, its opposite one, and cosine will be secant. I know it's kind of silly, but you have to do whatever makes sense to you so that you can remember it. So cosecant, if sine is 8/17, then its cosecant is 17/8. And if cosine is 15/17, then the secant is 17/15. And if the tangent of theta is 8/15, then the cotangent of theta will be 15/8. And you've found the 6 trig functions. Now on your assignment, they're not always going to give you all 3 sides. They're going to make you do a little bit more work. So I'm going to zoom this up a little bit. And I notice that right away, I don't have one of my legs. I have my hypotenuse, but I'm missing my leg. This time, this is my theta, so this will be my opposite, and I'm missing my adjacent. And here's my hypotenuse. So the first thing I've got to do is I've got to go find out what this leg is. So using our Pythagorean theorem, we have that I have a leg squared plus a leg squared, so the one I don't have, so x squared plus 9 squared equals 13 squared. So I'll minus 9 squared and let my calculator do the work for a minute. So 13 squared minus 9 squared is 169. Whoops. Minus 81, which is 88. Well, 88 is not a perfect square. So So I'll have to square root it, and then I'll just have to do its exact. So 88 is 8 times 11, so a 2 can come out, so it's 2 square roots of 11. So that's what this is going to be, 2 square roots of 11. And for, oh, not 11, 22. And for today's purposes, we're going to allow the square root, the 22, the 2 square roots of 22 to be in the denominator, even though a little bit later in our unit we won't do that. So let's go ahead and get our 6 trig functions now that we've got our 3 sides. We're going to find the sine of theta, the cosine of theta, and the tangent of theta. Then the cosecant of theta, the secant of theta, and the cotangent of theta. And as you write them down, please in your head don't say sin. As you write it down, say sine. As you're writing this down, say cosine. As you're writing this down, say tangent. Don't catch yourself getting into the mode of just saying tan and sin and cos. Please don't do that. Make sure you write them down like they're meant to be. Okay, I'm going to give you a second. Take a moment and see if you can get those 6 trig functions by yourself. And then, so stop the video and then come back, unpause it, and see if you got them right. All right, welcome back for my sine. Sine is opposite over hypotenuse, so that's 9/13. Cosine will be adjacent over hypotenuse, so 2 square roots of 22 over 13. Tangent will be opposite, which is 9, over adjacent, which is 2 square roots of 22. So then cosecant will be just the reciprocal, 13/9. Secant will be 13 over 2 square roots of 22, and cotangent will be 2 square roots of 22 over 9. Okay, that's our first part of trigonometry. So the first part of your assignment on your worksheet is those first six problems where you'll just find the trig ratios. Now be careful, sometimes they can be put into lowest terms. Like if I get 8/10, don't leave it as 8/10. Make sure you simplify it to 4/5. Okay, I'm going to say that one more time. When you're finished with your fraction, make sure that it's in lowest terms, that you cannot do more. All right guys, good luck, and we'll see you next time.